Hello, friends. It's Chop. Has how is that? Has that been growing and building up, or like, is there someone to success who would succeed him?
Well, yeah, there's definitely a faction fight going on within his party. It's called Morena. It was created basically for pretty recently before the elections, before he was sworn in 2019. He was previously of a different party that has since sort of degenerated into another of the sort of corrupt mafia-like parties. It's called the PRD. The main people in a running to replace him are the chairman of the party. It's called, a woman called Claudia Scheinborn or something like that, and the foreign minister called Marcelo Ebrard. He is probably the next most sort of visible figure in the government. There's definitely a left right split. A lot of people say that the foreign minister Marcelo Ebrard is the sort of more conservative section of the party, and he's open to take over and maybe pull the government um, away from some of President AMLO's more radical policies. But it's no one really. Certainly, for those who aren't insiders, it's not clear exactly what's going to happen. I think a lot of people would like if he ran again, but I'm sure that the New York Times would have a lot to say about that.
Well, I mean, speaking of those more radical policies, or imperialism, if you're in the Western press, or perhaps for you and your colleagues, maybe something that's being sort of maybe they're dragging their heels a little bit on it. Obrador announced his intention to use executive authority to nationalize Mexico's lithium supply in April, and hinted that he would expand. He would sort of work in conjunction with like the nationalization policies of other lithium rich nations like Bolivia and Argentina, as sort of like an alliance for these like lithium producing countries in the Latin American world. What is the status of that, and like what has been some of the reaction to that? Because obviously,
Yeah,
last time we spoke, lithium played a big role in the coup in Bolivia. So like this is a hugely important resource, and obviously like these countries seeking to nationalize and like take over control of this very valuable resource is obviously going to have huge shockwaves in how it's interpreted and dealt with.
yeah, absolutely. It's massive. It's also part of energy policy as well, obviously, because with that you get the transition to things like electric vehicles, and Latin America has the large majority of the world's lithium supplies. And if they can band together, it can form a sort of cartel and set the price rather than have the price dependent on fluctuations in international markets. This and yeah, Mexico has been very keen, especially talking with other countries that have nationalized its lithium, like Bolivia. AMLO has even been actually, made a comment critical of the fact that Chile, for example, is not nationalizing its lithium. But there is going to be an incredibly important alliance on the issue of lithium. There's especially on things like knowledge and investments and stuff. In countries like Bolivia, they need to bring in people from the outside, with the technical know-how, etc. Hopefully, countries like Mexico can help in doing that because uh, the argument from the opposition and the media is like, well, if you don't bring in the foreign companies, we'll never develop this. And so the especially Mexico and Bolivia, especially those two, are the ones who are trying to do this in a state-owned manner. I think just a few months ago, the law to nationalize lithium in Mexico was passed, and they're in the process of creating the state company. Bolivia's had their state company for quite a few years now, created in Evo Morales' government, and you know the process of industrialization is already happening. Bolivia already has three or four processing plants in the south of the country, but there needs to be a wide international development to make this a reality.
I remember the last time we talked, like as regards to Bolivia and their lithium resources. It's like the issue isn't so much, or even whether it's petroleum. Like the issue isn't so much getting it out of the ground; it's refining it so it's ready to like go to market as a product, and like whether the state controls that or whether they have to like outsource it. So even if they're like, receiving the benefit of just the raw natural resource, there's way more benefit and power to be had if you can control how it's refined, or like control the refining, because you're not buying it back from a third party, right?
Yeah, that is the key. That's everything because especially for President AMLO, that's the disadvantageous position Mexico is in terms of oil, for example, that they, as I said earlier, they extract the crude oil, sell it to the United States, and have to buy it back off the United States for a much higher price. So the key is to be able to do that within the country, and that will be worth trillions for the country. Countries like Chile, they're going for the other route of just digging up salt, just filling up bags of salt and selling that on the international market. And of course, they'll that brings in some revenues for the country, but it's a tiny fraction of what selling salt is. Uh, you don't earn as much as if you sell a fully informed battery. And in Bolivia, they're already making the prototypes. I was um, Congress last week, and they were sort of showing these. They've already made like a portable phone charger. They've made one of those like big batteries for electric cars. But the problem is they're although they're able to make it, they're not yet have the capacity to do it on a massive scale. That's going to need more investment. It's going to need more people coming in with the technical knowledge. So these things are already happening. It needs that impulse that an alliance with countries like Mexico could bring.
Yeah, and just like you alluded to, like sort of the cant of sort of anti-corruption politics, as whenever it's introduced when we're dealing with things like the state control of very valuable natural resources. And you recently interviewed a Mexican journalist, Jose Luis Granados Ceja, who discussed the importance of these energy reforms in both establishing AMLO's mandate, but also in reducing the poaching of Mexico's natural resources by foreign capital and financiers. So, like, and it's just sort of and also the predictability with which opponents of these reforms will turn to anti-corruption politics and anti-corruption sort of non-state NGO like institutions to sort of raise doubts and counter efforts to stop the like basically looting of these countries' resources.
Yeah, I mean you could write a book about the distortion of like discourses around corruption, especially in Latin America. I mean, some of it is quite really quite ridiculous. I remember reading just the other day. There was a story in the Bolivian press about because Bolivia has a state-owned glass factory, like it makes glass bottles and is owned but run by the government, and they were now going to sell glass bottles to Argentina for wine, for Argentinian wine. And it's kind of good story, I guess. It's not the biggest story in the world, but like all the comments underneath from like right wingers, like, oh, I bet these mass officials are stealing all the bottles. I bet they, this
They're
is
getting
the
5 cents every time they recycle it.
exactly. All of this discourse around corruption and if the state owns something, then the officials are going to steal it. Of course, it always leaves out the corruption that goes on in the private sector, and who is doing the corrupting, who is offering the bribes in capitalist countries. You get these like ridiculous. I'm sure you'd have seen it, the corruption perception index sort of league tables where
Mhm.
they rank countries by corruption, but of course it's not ranked by corruption; it's ranked by perceptions of corruption, how the citizens perceive the corruption within each country. So countries like the UK, people don't believe that there's any corruption because obviously there's no kind of propaganda campaign around it to their own citizens. Whereas, of course, we know that the UK and its financial center is probably the most corrupt place anywhere on earth, where people don't get bribes for $1,000 or $10,000, but where we're talking about millions and billions of pounds of dirty money being laundered and all sorts of other things. But um, these ridiculous tables to calculate what corruption is based on perception rather than actual cases. So is that's an international campaign as well. These tables are published in foreign media, etc. But I think this it's not something that I think should concern governments going forward.
Okay, if we could, I guess just, oh yeah, and one last thing about AMLO is that he has, I know, like, he was the one who offered asylum to Morales after the coup, and he's currently offering asylum to Julian Assange and citizenship as well. I mean, like, have you been following that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite impressive how outspoken AMLO has been about these sorts of issues, considering how important the sort of US Mexico relationship is. I think in relation to Assange, he said like if they jail Assange, then they should knock down the Statue of Liberty because it's
Yeah.
meaningless if they look up Assange. And yeah, he saved Evo Morales' life, uh, bringing a military plane to the jungle in Bolivia to pick up Evo Morales. And that plane was then shot at by rogue members of the Bolivian military. That's something that he revealed like a year later in a book, shot at with RPGs as they were trying to take off.
Jesus.
And the fact that they were willing to take that risk, with their military personnel, obviously taking your military personnel to another country, to a hostile country to do something is already enormously risky. And all sorts of things could go wrong, especially if your troops are then made to engage in like fire. You're then firing on foreign soil. All of this is fraught with difficulties, but he was able to do it. And uh, you know, at that time, who else was going to do it? Who else was going to do it? Argentina had a right wing government. All of Bolivia's neighbors had right wing governments. Evo Morales had nowhere to go, and Mexico came in with a plane and saved him at great risk to themselves. So that was an incredibly important thing. I've noticed, like in there since 2019, there's been like a massive like would say rise in popularity of like Mexican culture, of everything, of like sort of mariachi pop music, of like Mexican food. You see it everywhere in Bolivia, particularly since 2019. I think precisely because people see Mexico as a really friendly country, and there's a leader within the region for sovereignty.
Yeah, moving on from Mexico, which is probably like in Latin America, like the one of the biggest countries, certainly one of the most wealthy, and certainly one that has the closest relationship to the United States. But not too much far behind Mexico is Colombia, which has the third largest population in South America and has for like now 60 or 70 years basically been like the lodestar for American foreign policy in South America. They have just elected Gustavo Petro to be president. Like I guess like the first like left wing presidential like leader that they've had in that country like since the Civil War. How like okay? First of all, like how would you describe Gustavo Petro? Like his story, his political platform, but like how is the election of his party in Colombia, like such a close ally of the United States and one that's been ruled by the right wing for like 60 years? How is that being interpreted in the rest of Latin America, like particularly in like left wing movements? Are they
Yeah,
optimistic or are they sort of very cautious about where this may be going?
within the Latin American left, there's huge optimism about the election of Gustavo Petro. Again, not everyone knows everything about the movement and about him as a candidate, etc. But there is huge optimism because Colombia has been, for the Latin American left outside Colombia, Colombia has been the outpost where the United States has destabilized the rest of the continent. It's from their bases in Colombia where they attacked Venezuela. It's Colombia, which is the number one narco state in South America. Even the US's own figures from the State Department recognize that 96% of the cocaine that comes into the United States originates from Colombia. This is where the DA has the biggest presence of anywhere in South America.
Aren't they
Whereas,
also one of the biggest exporters of foreign mercenaries as well? Like,
yeah,
US
I mean,
trained like death
exactly.
squads
They,
and
they, they
mercenaries are used. I mean, like the Saudis use them and then like other, both like narco traffickers and, right wing governments. But like a lot of these guys are trained by the United States military because they've been, fighting the Civil War for like the last 50 years against
yeah,
leftist guerrillas.
Yeah, definitely. They first cut their teeth in the war against the Colombian people, in which they were trained by the United States. Then they go on and do things like assassinate the president of Haiti,
Yeah.
and they go like they even have a presence in the Middle East, and they're definitely, this new industry is forming, which is part of what makes going to make it so difficult for Gustavo Petro, because in now he has an opposition that is not only very organized, is not only very large, but they're armed to the teeth. They have people who are highly trained killers, paramilitary groups stretching back, 50, 60 years. You now got these sort of mercenary groups, ex soldiers trained in the most brutal and just savage forms of warfare. What are they going to do now? Are they going to accept a lot of what's they're going to try to do? Are they going to accept, for example, an expulsion of the US military presence? We haven't heard Gustavo Petro